I know. Solved is a big word, especially in FNaF, one people use in their titles just to get people to click the video. And sure, I'm guilty of that. I do it all the time, but sometimes evidence just falls into place. And sometimes you're just so sure that you've solved something that you just have to get it out there. I may very well be wrong, but I think this theory makes so much sense. You read the title. It's about Old Man Consequences. This theory was inspired by one of the recent FNaF game theories when Tom suggested that maybe Edwin was Old Man Consequences, and then Gibby's Horror Homesteads video following that. And at first, I thought that idea was completely insane, but after 37 seconds of thinking, the pieces started to come together. So in this video, we're going to talk about everything relating to Old Man Consequences, from Princess Quest to Ultimate Custom Night to FNaF World to the books. So without further ado, let's get started. FNaF World is way too often ignored in theory discussions, but it was in fact confirmed canon when Scott claimed in the doco interview that he had tied it into the actual FNaF lore. So what purpose does it serve? Well, it's not too difficult to figure out that the clocks show us someone setting up the pieces of Happiest Day, the same pieces from the FNaF 3 minigames. The clock ending trophy shows that the one meant to put these pieces together is the bite victim. He's who we're trying to save. But believe me, there's a lot more to this game than that. There's a move some characters have in FNaF World called Mimic Ball. Red alert, Mimic mention. Later we can also get a chip called Auto Mimic, which activates Mimic Ball permanently, and automatically. Now, back then this didn't seem like much. The Mimic didn't exist yet, at least to our knowledge, so why does it matter? First, it's important to note that the Mimic Ball literally mimics us. That sounds obvious, but it's really easy to misinterpret it as the Mimic Ball just allowing us to do the move again. But you can see a small animation whenever characters perform a move, and it's noticeably absent from the Mimic Ball. Also, the Mimic Ball summons Virtua Freddy, a see-through green code-lined Freddy silhouette, and he's the one who's actually doing the mimicking. He's the one copying the move. It's just like what the Mimic does, watching things happen and then copying them. But even more importantly, Virtua Freddy is designed in a very similar manner to Glitchtrap from FNaF VR, a character who we know is the Mimic. You know, FNaF VR, the virtual reality FNaF game. We have two neon green glowing and see-through versions of Freddy and Bonnie, both connected to the concept of mimicking, and both connected to the concept of a virtual reality, not to mention video games, since FNaF VR is an in-universe game, and FNaF World is a game that is aware that it is a game. But guess what? There's even more to note about the Mimic Ball. Back in Sister Location, we were introduced to the character of Yendo, a Funtime animatronic endoskeleton similar in design to the endoskeleton of Funtime Freddy, only Yendo has yellow eyes, and he acts similarly to Golden Freddy in that he only appears when you put down the camera and disappears when you lift it back up, and Golden Freddy in FNaF 1 was originally named Yellow Bear. Yendo is essentially the shortened form of Yellow Endo, plus an extra N for some reason, implying he may have represented a Funtime Golden Freddy that never actually existed. So why am I telling you this? Well, there's a couple characters in FNaF World that are also connected with this concept. For example, White Rabbit, a character we can find in Pinwheel Funhouse, the circus area. There's also Tangle and Red Bear in that area too. Each of these characters is very similar to characters we know from more recent FNaF games. Red Bear is pretty unremarkable, simply being like the literal red bear representing Cassidy in the Ultimate Custom Night Old Man Consequences minigame, as well as the same bear in the one from FNaF World as well. But White Rabbit and Tangle are much more significant, White Rabbit being like Vanny, and Tangle being part of the file name of the Blob. These are characters in some way related to the Mimic. Vanny is possessed by Glitchtrap, an extension of the Mimic program, and the Blob clearly has something to do with the Mimic, given it attacks Burntrap at the end of Security Breach. We can also find the Security Owl, a giant metal owl protecting the game's code. And this owl has two differently colored eyes. This is important because Tiger, David's plushie, has two differently colored eyes as well. And the story Tiger Rock, a story caused by the Mimic 1 program, has the main character Kai see a metal owl with Tiger Rock's eye colors. Speaking of Vanny, she is also a Yendo case in that her name, Vanny, is a combination of the words Vanessa and Bunny. The reason I brought that up is that FNaF World was actually the first game to have this concept of combining two words. Right at the beginning of the game, we meet the main three shopkeepers, Lolbit, Didi, and most importantly, Mendo, a blue endoskeleton with orangish yellow eyes who sells endoskeleton upgrades. Obviously he's an endo, right? But his name is Mendo, meaning some word starting with the letter M is combined with the word endo. You can easily see where I'm going here. It's an endoskeleton starting with the letter M, and his eye color is almost identical. His name can easily be Mimic Endo. But there's definitely a couple issues here. First, it's blue, and the Mimic is not blue. It's also an Endo 01 reskin, not matching the Mimic. But I'd argue the design doesn't really matter considering it's like from 10 years ago. Also, the fact that Lolbit and Didi both appear in later games, Sister Location and Ultimate Custom Night, would make it suspicious for Mendo to just be left in the dust. Some people have also said that his name is simply meant to be Mend Endo, as in he mends your endoskeletons, making new ones for us to make us more durable. But that's not what mend means. Mend means to repair something that's broken or damaged. Giving us a stronger endo doesn't really fall into that category. But I'd have maybe accepted that if it weren't for one other thing. One thing that I didn't even notice until I was researching for this video. In other words, when I was writing this video. Look at the top of Mendo's head. He has a small antenna on him, but he's not the only character in the game to have one of these. Can you guess who else does? The Mimic Ball. Mendo and the Mimic Ball are linked, and if Mendo is a combination of a word starting with M combined with the word endo, and Mimic starts with an M, it just makes sense. So we have the Mimic Ball, the Mimic Endo, and Mimic-related characters appearing in FNaF World. Clearly, something is going on here, so what's the deal? Well, I briefly mentioned earlier that FNaF World is a video game that is aware it is a game. There's constant talk about diving through glitches in the game's code, Purple Guy talks about being a game sprite, Anim Dude talks about how he beat the game on hard mode, and the whole plot of the game is essentially just breaking the game. Like I said before, we know FNaF World is canon to some capacity. It's just a question of whether it's a metaphor or a video game in-universe. I used to think it could really go either way, but now I am very confident that it is a game in-universe. Last year, 5 Laps at Freddy's was announced along with the release of a demo, essentially a FNaF Mario Kart game with a few little dark secrets. However, I only played it for the first time recently during a FNaF Catch-Up Day stream. So far, it seems alright, but I am super excited for the full release, not because of the racing game, but because of what they might not be showing us. Considering FNaF 6 was teased as a simple pizza simulator, it wouldn't be surprising for the racing simulator to be in a similar boat, secretly misleading us so it has the element of surprise when it turns out to be an actual full-on horror game. Hell, the logo for Laps is also identical to the rainbow pattern coming off Freddy in the FNaF 6 teasers, implying some sort of connection between Laps and FNaF 6. There's also the 2023 FNaF Halloween teaser posted by ClickTeam, the developers for Laps, which still hasn't paid off yet. This was all discussed more in depth in a video by fellow FNaF tuber Flipside, whose video on the topic I will leave in the description as long as I don't forget. But if it transforms into a horror game, it seems like it'll probably start out with an arcade or something, which would probably imply that this is a game in-universe. If I had to guess, I'd say the racing game will be a fully playable part of the game. You wouldn't even have to play the horror part if you don't want to, but then when you decide you don't want to play anymore, when you go to press the exit game button, it actually just zooms out from an arcade machine that you just turned off. You didn't close the game on your computer, you closed the game in-universe, and now you're in a horror game. Would be kind of inconvenient for the people that actually wanted to stop playing, but still, then it's the best of both worlds, allowing for a fun racing game and a lore-filled horror game. The description of the game also says sponsored by Fazbear Entertainment, absolutely confirming Laps to be a game in-universe. That's also supported by the kart safety video released on ClickTeam's channel, which includes keyboard and controller button controls. You could just say that's for the audience, but the style of the video being like a tape implies it is, again, in-universe.
It does also say ClickTeam at the beginning though, so it's obviously not a super strong point, just thought I'd bring it up.
Regardless of whether the game expands into a fully fledged horror game or if it does remain a fun racing game with some sprinkled in dark secrets and hidden lore, it still seems to be a video game based on that Fazbear sponsor in the description. So if 5 Laps at Freddy's is an in-universe game, what does that have to do with FNaF World? Well, one of the tracks in 5 Laps at Freddy's is called Fazbear Hills, and the description of it reads as follows, quote, "Race down the sunny roads of Animatronica's famous hills. Experience the thrills of the outdoors as you make your way through this classic classic locale." End quote. Now, this may not seem important at first, but it is when you turn your attention back to the first location in FNaF World, labeled Fazbear Hills and referred to by Fredbear as Animatronica. These two games are linked, and considering Laps is an in-universe game and FNaF World is a game that is aware it is a game, and both have Animatronica / the Fazbear Hills, it only makes sense for them both to be games in-universe. FNaF World is all about putting together the pieces of Happiest Day, which we find in FNaF 3, which would mean it is clearly a game that has been possessed and altered by spirits. But 5 Laps at Freddy's is not the only game FNaF World is linked to. Old Man Consequences has found 4 glitches down through FNaF World's code, essentially buried with no way back up, as if he was once on the surface as an integral part of the game, just like us, Adventure Freddy himself, and now for some reason isn't anymore. Old Man Consequences later appears at his same pawn in the same clearing surrounded by trees with the same red Freddy silhouette in the same 8-bit world in Ultimate Custom Night, which alone was really weird, but again, he's not the only FNaF World character that appears in that game. Dee Dee also makes an appearance, spawning new characters along with a pop-up saying a new challenger has appeared, in the same flashing pixelated text box that the same pop-up is in when you find a new character in FNaF World. There's even Easter eggs of Tangle, Bounce Pot, and White Rabbit, all from FNaF World and in their FNaF World forms, appearing on the desk in Ultimate Custom Night. Just like 5 Laps of Freddy's, Ultimate Custom Night is linked to FNaF World, but it goes even deeper. When you complete Old Man Consequences ending in FNaF World, you get the trophy of that 8-bit Freddy from 4 glitches down. However, if you go over to Ultimate Custom Night and do Old Man Consequences minigame, it triggers the programs in FNaF World's files that are usually triggered when you get the Old Man Consequences ending. To put it simply, FNaF World and Ultimate Custom Night's files are linked, and when you do the Old Man Consequences minigame in Ultimate Custom Night, you get the trophy for his ending in FNaF World, even if you haven't done that ending in FNaF World itself.
0 trophies, 0 endings, 0 gameplay. Okay, so we're gonna X out of that as well. I'm going deep into the lake. Uh-oh, I'm trapped in the water. Oh no! It's like quicksand. Here we go, FNaF World. We have not played this game whatsoever, and we hit start. Wouldn't you know it? Without playing a second of this game, look what suddenly appeared on our menu screen. A trophy that you unlock in FNaF World by visiting Old Man Consequences Lake. In other words, these two games, but more importantly, in the lore of this franchise, these two worlds are connected. Somehow.
So if FNaF World is a game, and it's linked to Ultimate Custom Night, then that implies that Ultimate Custom Night is also a game, one that is somehow connected through systems to the FNaF World game, causing certain elements to cross over. Some of you may immediately point out that the Fazbear Frights books are meant to answer questions, especially from the past year, which at the time was 2018, the year of Ultimate Custom Night. So if Ultimate Custom Night was a game, why would the book show it being a nightmare? This is one of the very few parts of this entire theory video that I have a hard time explaining satisfyingly, but there are a few options. It could just not be a lore hint and instead a way to give a more comprehensive showcase of how it works with the spirits tormenting each other and to show Eleanor's involvement. Or, depending on your beliefs, maybe the nature of it isn't what the story was meant to explain, instead being a way to explain that Andrew is the vengeful spirit, but obviously that's controversial. Some people also believe the Frights books are actually just arcades in universe, which could technically explain this, as if the story is an arcade, maybe the game it's explaining is also an arcade. It just depends on belief, but overall, I think if the games imply it's a game, that's probably more trustworthy than the books. Obviously the books are important, but the games are the solid timeline, so anything they say is definitely more definitive than what the books do. Regardless, it seems to me that 5 Laps of Freddy's, Ultimate Custom Night, and FNaF World are in-universe games, the latter two being possessed by certain spirits. But that's not the only time in the series when a series of video games were shown to be linked through some sort of possession or strange system of programs. I now present to you the Arcade Conspiracy. If you don't remember what the Arcade Conspiracy is, it's something that we learned about in Security Breach through a bunch of notes. It's a series of arcade games which are linked together, including Balloon World, Monty Golf, Chica's Feeding Frenzy, and most importantly, Princess Quest. There's a bunch of logs in Security Breach talking about glitches and strange things noted about those arcade games. Balloon World glitches after a while, Monty Golf is in a really odd spot, Chica's Feeding Frenzy won't turn off even when it's unplugged, and Princess Quest is a series, with Princess Quest 2 not being available to play until Princess Quest 1 is completed, but Princess Quest 3 for some reason and can't be played even after both 1 and 2 are done. Finally, we have the arcade conspiracy note itself, which reads as follows, quote, "They are working together. The arcades. They are hiding something. The glitches. Glitch them all at the same time. Then the princess will recognize me. She's testing me. I am not yet worthy. The others are protecting it. Let me stay. I am so close. Just one more night. Please, I can save the princess." End quote. Although all the arcades are playable throughout Security Breach and Ruin, the arcade conspiracy itself, strangely, never actually paid off. The idea of glitching all the arcades at the same time to save the princess never did anything, and the only arcade necessary for the Princess Quest ending was Princess Quest itself. So was it a scrapped concept? Maybe, but seems unlikely, otherwise why keep the notes about them in the game at all? It could be planned for something in the future as well, since Balloon World is labeled Into Madness in the files, which Scott said 7 years ago would be a future FNAF game about a collection of minigames, and we never actually got it. So maybe the collection of minigames consists of the arcades involved in the conspiracy. However, that's not the only collection of minigames FNAF has to offer. FNAF VR itself, as well as Help Wanted 2, were collections of minigames too, yet we know those weren't Into Madness since Into Madness was announced alongside and separately from FNAF VR. But the other collection of minigames we know of is FNAF World Update 2, which Scott even compared Into Madness to. So we have FNAF World, an in-universe game, linked with Ultimate Custom Night and 5 Laps of Freddy's. We have the Arcade Conspiracy, a series of linked arcade games, linked with Into Madness, which also links to FNAF VR, another in-universe game, and it's all linked back to FNAF World. The Arcade Conspiracy has existed as far back as FNAF World. I feel like I'm a conspiracy theorist myself, the way that I'm freaking out when I'm saying all this. I don't know what's wrong with me. Basically, it's like a hive mind of Fazbear arcades, but not all Fazbear arcades, meaning it's clearly not just a hive mind of Fazbear systems. There's something specific in all of these games that connects them together. So, what is it? The Mimic. I already talked about FNAF World's connections to the Mimic, but what about everything else? Well, Ultimate Custom Night has Mimic-related characters like White Rabbit and Tangle appear. Balloon World is a minigame about Sun and Moon, which are linked with the Mimic as we know from Secret of the Mimic, as well as their parallels to Vanny and Vanessa. Speaking of Vanessa, she appears in Chica's Feeding Frenzy, and it doesn't make much sense for Fazbear Entertainment to just throw a random one of their security guards into an arcade game. Monty Golf replicates a bunch of different locations and characters from throughout the series, as does 5 Laps at Freddy's, which is exactly what the Mimic is used for in FNAF VR, where the Mimic is of course also involved as a glitch trap. Every single game within the Arcade Conspiracy has something to do with the Mimic. We also know the Mimic is a hive mind, as Burn Trap and Security Breach is able to remotely tinker with Freddy, so it all adds up. But the games I find most interesting are Ultimate Custom Night, FNAF World, and Princess Quest. All 3 are minigames that are a part of this extended Arcade Conspiracy, and all 3 of them have something very specific in common: Old Man consequences. That's right. 5 pages into the script, and we're finally talking about the guy you clicked on this video for. So what do we know about him? Like I said earlier, he first appears in FNAF World 4 glitches deep in the code, simply telling you that you've gone too far and that there's no way back up. He looks to be wearing some sort of alligator mask, and he is just sitting and fishing in a small red pond in a clearing surrounded by trees. He appears in the same place in Ultimate Custom Night, only this time he is trying to help the vengeful spirit. He's a peaceful character, essentially trying to stop people from going too far like he did. With the vengeful spirit, he thinks torture goes too far, and with us in FNAF World, he is sad to tell us that we have already gone too far. His name is Old Man Consequences, so it makes sense that he did something that went too far and it resulted in great consequences, and he's trying to stop others from experiencing the same. He also appears in Princess Quest, trying to help the princess save Vanessa from the Mimic's control. So we know he went too far and it resulted in consequences, he's trying to stop others from doing the same, and he strongly opposes the Mimic. So it's no wonder why the idea of Old Man Consequences being Edwin broke out after Secret of the Mimic. Edwin making the Mimic wasn't inherently a problem, but he went too far when he beat it to a pulp, and that resulted in the consequence of both him and the numerous others dying at the hands of the Mimic. He went too far, and there was no way back, just like what Old Man Consequences tells us in FNAF World. We've gone too far down, and now there's no way back. But that's all pretty general, and although there's not that many characters that also applies to, you could just as easily say Old Man Consequences is Henry instead, based on all that logic. So what, if anything, implies him to be Edwin specifically? Well, there's a few things in Secret of the Mimic that tie in with Old Man Consequences, specifically outside MCM and in the Moon.exe minigame. Taking the camera farther ahead of MCM, we can find a pond surrounded by trees, just like the one Old Man Consequences sits at. There's also a pond in Moon.exe, and we can even go up to it and try to catch the fish. Old Man Consequences is also always fishing, and we even have to catch fish for him in Ultimate Custom Night, which is how we get to his pond in the first place. What's more is that there's a collectible in Secret of the Mimic called Monty's Water Game. Every time you get a collectible in this game, it appears in Moon.exe in a certain place, and guess where Monty's Water Game appears? That's right next to the pond, and Monty is an alligator just like Old Man Consequences. Another fellow FNAF tuber, Gibby's Horror Homestead, recently released his own video about Old Man Consequences and the idea of him being Edwin, and one thing he talked about was connecting each early important person at Fazbear Entertainment to each of the main 6 characters. We learn in the Silver Eyes that Henry and Afton usually named Fredbear and Spring Bonnie respectively. We see a photo of them in both suits in the graphic novel. However, with the more recent games, we have confirmation that there was once a time when Fredbear and Spring Bonnie existed before the Springlock suits did. Fredbear was once regular Freddy, and since Spring Bonnie was named after being a Springlock suit, his name before them would just be Bonnie. We see both of them as costumes before they were Springlock suits in the Fredbear posters in Security Breach, so Henry represents Freddy, and William represents Bonnie. We also know from Secret of the Mimic that Fiona represents Chica, as she was the one who designed her. Before this game came out, we'd have thought that only left Foxy, but in the Parachute ending and the Secret ending, we learn that there's 2 more characters, Bub the bitch, I mean the female dog, and Monty the male alligator. So who represents them? Well, if Fiona is represented by someone, by default Edwin should be too. Given the lack of knowledge we have about her, it's possible Afton's wife is the stand-in for Bub, though Henry's wife could also be for the same reason. So that only leaves Foxy and Monty, and Edwin should theoretically be one of them. The question is there anyone else that can fill the role of either of them, excluding spirits who could possibly possess them? And there is one. Phone Guy, aka Ralph. We know he'd been around at Freddy's for a pretty long time, and he expresses his love for Foxy. In FNAF 2, he seems unsure if Fredbear's Family Diner really is the name of the first restaurant, but the week before confirms he was just feigning ignorance, as he is actively aware of the Bite of 83, and even recognizes songs that once played at Fredbear's, meaning he worked with Fazbear since at least Fredbear's Family Diner, or earlier. So him being around back in the 70s isn't illogical. He therefore takes the place of Foxy, leaving Edwin to be Monty. This also adds up pretty well, since Monty in Security Breach is the aggressive character in the group, when Edwin being aggressive is what made the Mimic aggressive. But the thing is, I don't think Edwin is Old Man Consequences, at least not in the traditional sense. I think Old Man Consequences is the Mimic with Edwin's personality. Now, this part is admittedly a little harder to explain, because the Edwin side of the Mimic is the part that is aggressive, but we also know the Mimic is able to learn on his own, like how in the Mimic story it begins to respond to David rather than exclusively copy him. In Secret of the Mimic, he actively wants the Data Diver, and he wants to become the David personality, because although he has to be aggressive based on his programming, he doesn't want to be, which is pretty interesting. In the Secret ending, he literally opens his chest for us to use the Data Diver on him and change him back into David, but there's something really intriguing that I noticed about that. He changes back to the David personality, so what happens to the Edwin personality? Well, it all comes back to the device we use for this, the Data Diver, and how exactly it works. Throughout the game, we use our Data Diver on computers to bring up our logs and maps and Moon.exe progress. We use it to activate programs on certain computers too, but most importantly, we use it to collect logs from the mailboxes. This best showcases what this thing really is. It's essentially an advanced USB. It collects data from the mailboxes in the computers and stores it to bring it up on another computer. We use it at the end of the game to collect the Mimic blueprints, and we use the Data Diver to insert those blueprints into the Mimic in the Secret ending. This reverts it back to the David personality, but what happens to the Edwin personality? Does it just go dormant, or does the Data Diver, like usual, collect the data? Collect that Edwin piece of the Mimic program. To put it simply, after the Secret ending, we put the Mimic blueprints into M2 and take the Edwin personality out, storing it in our Data Diver. If that ending were to be the canon ending, that Data Diver could be used in the future of the series for, say, video games, like the Arcade Conspiracy games. FNaF World Update 2 talks about how a bunch of characters had their code recycled to make spin-off games. What if that's meant to show us that the Mimic was used in that exact same way for the Fazbear Entertainment games? That's why the conspiracy adjacent games have the Mimic in them, and that's why Old Man Consequences is in 3 of the Arcade Conspiracy games, because it's the Mimic, the Edwin version of the Mimic. He recognizes the flaws of his violent ways, whether on his own or from extra information he receives elsewhere, possibly within the games themselves, and becomes Old Man Consequences. Now, I'm fully aware that that last part is very probably a stretch. It's less of a theory and more of a hypothesis about how this theory can work. See, I think everything about the arcade conspiracy and the Mimic connections is all really solid and makes a lot of sense. I think Edwin being Old Man Consequences, whether the Mimic version of him or the real spirit, also makes a lot of sense. I think the Data Diver being a more advanced USB is also solid, but I think the Data Diver storing the Edwin part of the Mimic and then him realizing the error in his ways is, while possible, a bit of a stretch. The Data Diver storing the Edwin part of the Mimic definitely works, but that becoming Old Man Consequences works, but again, definitely still a really big stretch. It would make sense if that's the part of the Mimic that became Glitch Trap though, since a bunch of circuit boards and other stuff containing the Mimic were sent to Silver Parasol for assistance in making FNaF VR, so that Data Diver being one of them makes sense. Another thing I think is worth mentioning is the fact that Edwin made a puppet show with Foxy and very well could have been the one to create Foxy as a character, meaning he could be the stand-in for Foxy instead of Phone Guy. In that case, someone else, probably someone who hasn't even been introduced yet, may be the Monty stand-in, and that could be Old Man Consequences instead. As Gibby said in his video, it depends on whether or not another Monty-related character is introduced in the future, considering people were theorizing about Mixes back in Ruin, yet she ended up being a character that wasn't even introduced yet, so it can easily be the same for Old Man Consequences. Who knows? Overall, I think most of this theory makes a lot of sense, and I'm curious to know your thoughts. Do you think Ultimate Custom Night is a game, or do you still think it's a nightmare like the man in room 1280 seems to suggest? What do you make of the arcade conspiracy? Who do you think Old Man Consequences is? Let me know in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!